Thank you. Oh, please sit. Hi, everyone. Thank you, Lynn, for that kind introduction, and really, everybody in this room wishes you well. I'd also like to thank everyone for being here today. You know, today is all about you. It's about people from all across our country coming together with one goal in sight: to double the rate of progress toward cancer. 10 years of progress into 5. Joe and I have been moved by all of you, standing together against cancer, putting forth new ideas, and taking new actions that will make all the difference in the world for so many families affected by this disease. For Joe and me, this fight is personal. My sister recently had a stem cell transplant, and she's doing well. Our son, Beau, my mother, my father. So we know how important this fight is. But we know it's bigger than all of us. It affects millions of people around the world every day. Since President Obama announced that Joe would be at the helm of mission control of the Cancer Moonshot Initiative, we've been traveling across the country and really around the world, hearing directly from top researchers, doctors, patient advocates, and cancer fighters and survivors. We are more convinced than ever that real change is possible. We've seen it in the labs we visited at cancer centers across the United States, researchers finding new, less damaging ways to find and destroy cancer. We've seen it in the hospitals, talking with the nurses and the oncologists in New Orleans, hearing the challenges faced by caregivers and how we can better enable them to deliver the best care possible. And I saw it in patients that I met in Boston earlier this year, and I heard their stories about their fight and the progress that they hope to see. What we've seen is that everyone from every sector has something to contribute. And that's what it's going to take. That's how we're going to win this fight, all of us together. And that's why last year, Joe called for a moonshot to cure cancer, to bring people together and to make the seemingly impossible possible. He knew it would take a nationwide and even worldwide commitment, bringing together our best and our brightest. Because only together can we seize the moment to defeat cancer. So today is about you, the fighters and the survivors, the caretakers and the researchers, the philanthropists and the patient advocates. It's about the millions of Americans, their loved ones, and all those around the world who are confronting cancer. It's about hope, but ultimately it's about action. Because of all of you and many others watching at home, we've made incredible progress this year, progress that Joe will talk about in detail. So now it's my pleasure to introduce a man of action, the man President Obama put in control, at mission control of this moonshot, my husband, our Vice President, Joe Biden.
Gina McCarthy at EPA, Dr. Francis Collins, NIH director, and the guy who is most responsible for the Human Genome Project, an incredible achievement all by itself. The National Cancer Institute director, Doug Lowy, who has has been a great, great ally and educator of mine. FDA Administrator Robert Califf, and Acting Administrator for Medicare and Medicaid Services, Andy Slavitt, and Tyler Jacks, Elizabeth Jaffe, and the co-chairs of the Blue Ribbon Commission. I wish I could, and the public deserves to know every one of you in this room. And I mean every one of you, because you're the ones that have done such remarkable work to date, and you're the ones who are going to be responsible for what I believe will be an enormous amount of progress we'll make soon. First of all, when Barack Obama asked me to head up this moonshot, there were some skeptics out there and said, well, here we go again. Nixon declared a war on cancer in 1971. There's a big difference. In 1971, President Nixon's interest and concern was real and genuine, but he had no army. He had no resources. No clear strategy existed to win. But 45 years later, after decades and decades of funding, new research, training scientists and physicians, treating millions of patients because of so many of you, we now have a powerful new technologies and tools. We have an army. And with this moonshot, a clear strategy on the road ahead. The moonshot does two things. One, first, it injects, and because of all of you, an incredible sense of urgency back into this fight. Part of it is that what I said to the president when I walked out in the Rose Garden that day and said, I regret, it was spontaneous. I said, the only thing I regret is not announcing I'm not running for president. I'd like to preside over the end of cancer as we know it. Not we'd solve it all, but the end of cancer as we know it. And some wags, particularly in some of your professions, said, like, here we go again. Here we go again. But you know what? What happened is that because of you, there is a fundamental new sense of urgency. I think you all can feel it. You've generated it. It's not only here, but it's around the world. And the second thing is, back in 1971, when there was no army, there was not all this data. We didn't even know then there were 200 different cancers. What's happened is that we had a set of rules, a culture that was established for research and cooperation that is not applicable to 2016. The change in the cultural system that's needed to win this fight is kind of what we're all about. Jill and I, as Jill mentioned, every family is facing, everybody knows someone, if not their own family, facing cancer. And we know what it does to a family. Our family learned as much as we could, which all of you do, and some of you who are in the profession are survivors and or you've lost someone. And what do you do even if you have no background in cancer? It's your child, your husband, your wife. You try to learn everything you can about the disease, both for purposes of hope and deciding on what you can do. What is it you can do? Is there anything you can do that speeds the progress? Because the one thing that every single cancer patient needs is a little bit of hope. Hope. My mother used to say, where there's life, there's hope. What we learn from the world's best nurses, physicians, and researchers is that even if we couldn't save our son, the science, the medicine, the technology are progressing faster than ever. So be able to save countless sons and daughters. As I've been saying repeatedly, I didn't realize this till Beau was diagnosed with stage 4 glioblastoma. We knew it was the death sentence. We're not slow. He knew. We all knew. But there was hope. We just thought there was hope because cancer in the last 6 years reached an inflection point that didn't exist 7, 8, 10, 20, 30, 40 years ago. By inflection point, and we found there's a recognition that the cancer system established 5 decades ago needs to be re-imaged for the 21st century. that too often our cancer culture and system still plays by the rules of 71, not 2016. But so much has changed. Let me explain. 5 years ago, oncologists weren't routinely working with immunologists. Immunology was sort of a voodoo science 10, 15 years ago. No, I'm not joking. I'm a bit pejorative, but truly, engaging the immune system to kill cancers. There were three things that were done routinely. Find the tumor, excise it. What you couldn't get out, make sure you radiate the margins. And number three, which kills a lot of healthy parts of your brain or your body. And then engage in significant doses, depending on the seriousness of the cancer, of chemotherapy, which kills an awful lot of those cells that we need to engage, those T cells, to kill the cancer. So with immunologists and virologists, geneticists, chemical engineers, and others, they're now all working together and beginning to work even more closely together. It's becoming more routine than the exception now. Today, there's a recognition that by aggregating and sharing data from millions of patients, genomics, family histories, lifestyles, treatment outcomes, we have now what we didn't have before. We have a supercomputing capacity. We can actually do a million, you all know it, but the press, 1,000,000 billion calculations per second, enabling us, at least theoretically, if we aggregate enough data, to be able to find new patterns and causes and successful treatments of cancer. Why does one treatment work on you and not on me? We have the same cancer. Because of technological advances and analyzing cancer genes and other genes in the body, we're closer than ever before to understanding what causes specific cancers, how to attack them. A few years ago, it took more than $2.7 billion to sequence the first human genome, as the doc knows. Now it takes less than a day and costs under $1,000. New technologies, new therapies, as I said, like immunology, targeting cancer cells by using the immune system. But it does less damage to healthy cells and transforming many types of cancers into chronic and manageable diseases, where 10 years ago they were a death sentence. We got a long, long way to go. But we're in a new place. And it's our obligation, for those of us in government and the private sector, to inject a sense of urgency, to seize the moment now. That's the change the President and I are looking for. And I gave to the Cancer Moonshot with a simple, bold mission. As Jill said, make in 5 years the progress would otherwise take us 10 years in preventing, diagnosing, and treating cancer. Today, I'm reporting back to the President. I just did, as a matter of fact. There's two reports. One, a vision statement as to what we should be doing from this point on. The American people, and the second one, to let the American people know how far we've come together, and that's the task force report. How far we've come together in less than a year to lay out what we've done, in addition to the roadmap of what we do for here as we proceed. In releasing the report of the Cancer Moonshot Task Force that President Obama created, is comprised of 20 cabinet and sub-cabinet agencies and policy councils. The President put me in charge of a task force to marshal every resource in the federal government that touches cancer, from the National Institute of Health to the National Aeronautic and Space Administration. You say, what the hell did that have to do with anything? No, seriously, it wasn't engaged before. We know the damage that radiation does. Nobody in the world knows as much about radiation and its effect on the human body as NASA. They're experimenting with new forms of radiation that don't do damage to tissue surrounding where the cancer was. Not done yet, but they know so much more than everybody else. We're going from the Defense Department to the Department of Energy, from EPA to the Patent Office, to the National Endowment of the Arts, They all are able to and are now at a federal level beginning to coordinate and play a role. In this report, you'll find how we're doing everything from realigning research incentives to break down silos and promote team science and data sharing. Again, there was no need for team science in 1971. There wasn't much data to share in 1971. One example is the NCI's Genomic Data Commons we launched this year to bring together cancer sequencing data and the patient information for tens of thousands of individuals, a number that's growing, which is already being used by millions of researchers. Since we set this up, millions of researchers have gone to this site. How long has it been, Doc? What, 4 months? 3 months? Reducing bureaucratic delays, speeding innovation. One example is the FDA Oncology Center for Excellence, which brings together cancer expertise at FDA to streamline. One of the problems now is we got all this research going on, but FDA doesn't have enough cancer specialists on their payroll to be able to analyze whether or not this particular therapy is a sound therapy. That by itself is a statement that we're now going out trying to find as many qualified cancer experts to come onto the payroll of the FDA to determine, is this therapy worth taking a chance on? Streamline the review of all cancer-related projects, diagnostics, devices, therapies. Another example is U.S. Patent Office and Patent and Trademark Office is cutting in half from 2 years to less than one patent review applications in select fields of cancer therapies. We're speeding everything up. We know that aggregating data can lead to finding patterns that even the greatest scientists in the world wouldn't be able to see on their own. That's why we combine the 21st century technology of supercomputing power at the national labs of the Department of Energy with the data of the world's largest hospital, the Department of Veterans Affairs. For example, one example, allowing us to examine and understand a disease like cancer in a group of over 500,000 veterans. By examining and engaging in the President's Innovation Fellows, and we have, one of the great things the President did, not just as it relates to this, it went out to Silicon Valley and said, look, we need your brightest to come and work for the government for a year or so. Help us do in private what you do in the private industry. Help us do that to streamline government and increase our potential exponentially. Some of the top technology minds in the world have come in. And now they're working with the National Cancer Institute to make it easier for patients and their doctors to find out where trials are available. Only 4% of all the people who are diagnosed with cancer are able to get into a cancer trial. Now anyone can go to trials.cancer.gov, type in real words like breast cancer or leukemia, a zip code, an age, and find a list of clinical trials near you or your loved one that previously you wouldn't have any idea how to find, even though we had a site. And you'll find the efforts outlined by the Blue Ribbon Panel the President asked the National Cancer Institute to convene to support our efforts by calling out the greatest areas of scientific opportunity. That's what the panel did. They went and took a look. Where, my dad, again, I'm always quoting my dad, but he's a pretty smart guy. My dad used to say, if everything's equally important to you, nothing's important to you. Let me say that again. If everything's equally important to you, nothing's important to you. Everything requires prioritization. That's what the Blue Ribbon Panel did. The best minds in the world assembled and said, here's how we should go at this. I also presented a report to the President entitled The Vice President's Executive Report that incorporates what Jill and I have learned traveling across the country and around the world, meeting with literally thousands of cancer patients, physicians, researchers, philanthropists, technology leaders, and heads of state like you all over the world. The report not only includes what we're now doing, but also what we need to do in the future. For example, enhancing prevention efforts. You all know this better than any audience assembled. It's estimated that at least 50% of cancers can be prevented. But it's not just by just by changing lifestyle, such as living healthy lifestyles and avoiding the use of tobacco. That's just one of the personal actions that you can take to avoid cancer risks. But there's also responsibilities of government and industry to reduce carcinogenics and toxins in the air we breathe and the water we drink. That's preventative as well. There's a third form. We don't usually think of it this way. Most people don't. Technology and medical advances enable us to prevent and detect cancers earlier. You know, all the research all of you have done. We've now found hereditary markers to give people significant opportunity to go out instead of waiting until they are 48 years old to get their first colonoscopy. If they have the marker, get one when they're 16 years old. And by continuing to keep an eye on it, preventing the cancer from ever developing. Look, there's also new technologies that are being worked on, like blood biopsies. For a non-scientist like me, I find it absolutely incredible and exciting. Talking with the great cancer hospitals around the world that are working on this. Liquid biopsies, non-invasive mobile imaging techniques. And by the way, the liquid biopsies, for the press who may or may not know, you all know, there's markers in the blood that tell you whether or not you have a particular cancer. And you may have a tumor in a place that is too dangerous to go into excise. If you can find the marker in the blood, you can do the genetic sequencing from that marker in the blood and decide, no, it's benign. I don't have to go in there and risk damage in other parts of the body or the brain. To determining whether or not you have a marker for cancers that take a long time in developing, that we already know. It's exciting. Engaging more patients in research to increase the percentage of patients enrolled in clinical trials, cutting the time and cost of those clinical trials. What I didn't realize before I started this, you all know it, is the very drug companies, they don't have enough patients to engage in the trials. It's not just that 96% of the patients never know where there's a trial they can engage in. This is a win-win for both the patient and the drug companies conducting the trials. Expand access to care and the cutting of cost of care by reaching communities across the United States with the newest breakthroughs so that the outcomes aren't wholly dictated by your zip code. A new payment models that reward quality care, not quantity. Making sure insurance coverage decisions are rooted in what works for the patient. Laying down principles for an international commitment, which I did at the conference on regenerative medicine that Pope Francis hosted in the Vatican. We already have signed on 10 memorandum of understanding of cooperations with nations from Asia to the Middle East to Europe to North America to share more genomic and protein data on hundreds of thousands of patients. And today we're adding more than 35 new public and private commitments. For example, Microsoft and Amazon, I hope they have representatives here. If they are, I want to say thank you, have stepped up partnering with the National Cancer Institute to use their cloud computing capabilities to store the genomic data of tens of thousands of patients. And that's being used by millions of researchers already. These commitments build on nearly 40 other commitments that we made known at the Cancer Moonshot Summit, like IBM and Watson. IBM contacted my director, Greg Simons, and said, look, I think we can be value added here. Watson has a lot of information. And so we can work with the Defense Department and the VA so veterans with cancer get their tumor sequenced, and Watson searches all known literature, literally all the known literature relevant to targeted treatments for the patients to discuss with their doctors. How long would it take an individual to go through and acquire that data? As all of you brilliant scientists and doctors and researchers and advocates know, we're just getting started. And most of all, these reports to the American people share the story of the spirit of discovery that defines this nation. and gives me every confidence that we're going to make enormous progress. One of the other reasons why I said what I said when I announced I wasn't running for president is it disturbs me that for the first time in my career, over the last decade, some of the American people are no longer of the view that we can do anything. Think about it. 20 years ago, if we put enough time and effort and science behind it, we could do anything. I'm not being figurative, I'm being literal. We could do anything. Well, we can do virtually anything. We have the talent, we have the resources, we have the commitment, we have the capacity. One of the things I most wanted to do, once you make the progress that is predicted, I'm predicting you all will make over the next 5 years, it'll regenerate this sense of optimism and commitment. It's an amazing time. Your kids are going to be traveling subsonically at 22,000 miles an hour. Not a joke. That's not hyperbole. Within the next 5 to 6 years, we'll be calculating 1 billion calculations per second. What was it 10 years ago? We are on the cusp of so many just enormous breakthroughs. Your children are going to see more progress in the next 15 years than what happened in the last 50 years. And again, that's not hyperbole. It's across an entire spectrum. Earlier this year, I spoke at Rice University. Almost 4,000 people showed up. A good friend of mine, he is a good friend of mine, shows you how antiquated he and I are. Jim Baker, former Republican Secretary of State, who's a supporter, quite frankly, and I am of his. He invited me down to talk about the moonshot. Almost to the day that John F. Kennedy spoke in the same spot at Rice University, announcing the moonshot to go to the moon. Here's what John Kennedy said. He said, we choose to go to the moon in this decade and do other things, not because they're easy, but because they are hard. And because that goal will serve to organize and measure the best of our energies and our skills, because that challenge is one we are willing to accept. And here's the important line in my view. One that, speaking of the challenge, one that we are unwilling to postpone. We're unwilling to postpone. And one that we intend to win, and others too. That's where we are today in cancer, the moonshot. Except guess what? There was only one moon. There's 200 cancers. It's harder, in a sense. It's not susceptible to a single diagnosis or treatment, each requiring, though, an enormous sense of urgency. And in President Kennedy's words, we're unwilling to postpone. I think that's what all of you share. An unwillingness to postpone doing this. That's what I've seen all across the country and around the world, and I'm not joking. I told the team I was in the UAE, sitting out on the Gulf with Mohammed bin Zayed, the guy who runs the show. And he had all his security team. I'm supposedly an expert in foreign policy. I was there to talk about ISIS. They call it Daesh, and how we were going to defeat it. And he says it was an entire team. There were, I think, 8 people on his side of the table, and I had 8. He said, Mr. Vice President, before we begin, can I talk to you about cancer? Before we begin. That's why I went. ISIS. Before we begin, can we talk about cancer? I'm prepared to cooperate. We need help. The rest of the world is looking to the United States of America to aggregate, collate, convene, bring together the world. When the President has his National Security Summit on nuclear proliferation in the White House, 50 heads of state in the East Room, with tables set up end to end in a big rectangle. 50 heads of state, the president in front of the fireplace at the end of the grand hall, and me with my back to it. And he looked up at me, he said, "Before we begin, I know a lot of you want to talk to Joe about cancer, but let's wait till this is over." I'm not exaggerating this, guys. I'm not joking. If we don't do something, we're going to have over 20.5 million new cases of cancer in the first part of the next decade, with millions of people dying. And the reason I keep talking about urgency, and I'll end with this, is that a lot of you who are docs, how many times have you had one of your patients say to you, "Doctor, can you give me 2 more weeks? Because I want to walk her down the aisle. Can you give me another month so I can see him graduate? Doc, if you could, do you think I could make it for the next 8 months? Because if I do, I can put my business back together and I can leave my family in good shape." It's not about tomorrow. It's about today. Thousands of brilliant researchers, like all of you, spending nights and weekends in labs looking for the next breakthrough. Countless patients full of courage, hoping they can return to their lives and their families, asking, as I said, just a couple more weeks, a couple more months. Brave parents starting foundations like the incredible person who introduced me, not just to remember, but to honor how the heart and soul of their husband, their wife, their brother, their sister, themselves, their daughter, how they lived. Companies and entrepreneurs developing cures and technologies the right way for the right reason. Everyone from philanthropists, many of you among you, I wish I could name you all, pouring your own money into a fight, to the little girl who opened up a lemonade stand, doing her part to help her classmates. And Congress is stepping up. They're going to make trust me, I may not know a lot about science, but I know more about Congress than anybody you know. You think I'm joking, I'm not. Some of the best leaders in this effort are my Republican colleagues up in the Hill. They're committed. This is the last bastion, hopefully it will come back, but the last bastion of genuine, true bipartisanship. We will get, I predict to you, significant increases in funding this year from this Congress. And we'll get a commitment to keep that commitment going for the next 10 years. The Cancer Moonshot is a movement that lives in communities across the United States and the world and will live on because the need is too great and the promise is even greater. Like President Kennedy challenged the nation before, let this moonshot challenge all of us to think anew about what's possible and end cancer as we know it. I'm not naive. I've been doing this longer than most of you. It won't be easy, but we can do this. We can give more time. We can give more hope. And we can do it together, right now. Not tomorrow, right now. Not tomorrow. And again, and where I began, you're the people. I wish I could have each one of you come up here and me to introduce every one of you and talk about the enormous contributions you've made. When we succeed, it's going to be because of the people in this room and your colleagues all around the world. So guys, I want to thank you in advance because I promise you, we are going to succeed. Thank you all.